Right, what I'd like you to do first of all is to cast your minds back, if you will, to July 2005. That was a very important month for London for lots of very good reasons. On the 6th of July 2005, you see Dame Kelly Holmes here, one of our more famous athletes, looking rather pleased with ourselves because that was the day that Jacques Robb, the president of the IOC, announced that London will have the honour of staging the Olympiad in 2012. Uniquely, the third city, the only city that has actually staged 3 Olympics. But much more importantly for me, we beat the French by 1 vote. Yes! And then the next day, some of you I know in the group were in London at the time. The 7th of July 2005, London was visited once again by a terrorist atrocity. There were suicide bombers on our transport system. People lost their lives. So in 20 hours, the whole city went from euphoria to shock. At that time, the biggest construction project in Europe was this one. This is Heathrow Terminal 5 in construction. The link there from my own personal experience. At the time I was a senior executive working for BAA. One of my responsibilities was to oversee sustainability in construction. And Terminal 5 was a very controversial project. It went through a 7-year public inquiry. They set up a group called AGIC, the Environmental Advisory Group. And that group was responsible. It was all the kind of great and good, the A-list glitterati of sustainability in the UK came to advise and challenge our targets and tell us how we should be delivering a project of this size more sustainably. This is a £4.2 billion project. It's the largest single airport terminal building in Europe. Once the planning permission was granted, that group was quietly disbanded. Some of the targets were very well achieved and some of the targets were quietly brushed under the carpet. If I can just fast forward you a little bit then to April 2008, that's when Heathrow Terminal 5 was opened by Her Majesty the Queen. By then the biggest project in town was the Olympic Park, a £9.6 billion, in my opinion, regeneration project to be interrupted by a few weeks of sport. I was very determined, having been involved in a group called the London Sustainable Development Commission, advising the Mayor on the potential targets for the London Olympics programme in 2005, that we would actually have a body that wasn't like AGIC. It wasn't just kind of a talking shop that came up and gave some advice. I wanted a body that could really hold the delivery bodies to account for delivering the levels of sustainability that they said they would, for delivering on their promise to be the most sustainable games ever, and to really exhibit best practice. I think sustainability is something that can be massaged in the way that you present it. It's something that people don't necessarily fully understand. So what I wanted was a properly funded, properly resourced, independent body that could really hold these delivery bodies to account throughout the course of the Games. So you can imagine how proud I felt in May 2007 when I was appointed by then Mayor Ken Livingstone as the chair of the Commission for a Sustainable London 2012. I got pretty much everything I wanted. I got the body that I wanted, I got the resources, I got the funding, I got the whole thing. And I got myself ready for this role. My God, did I mug up on everything. I knew about combined heat and power, I knew about membrane bioreactors, I knew about bioremediation of soil, I knew about social return on investment, you name it, I was ready for this job. So, what are the 3 things that the great British public asked me most about the London Olympics? Number 1, can you get me any tickets? Preferably for the women's beach volleyball, Brazilian team or something like that. And I don't really fancy the Greco-Roman wrestling very much, but anything else will do. Yeah, right, I applied for loads of tickets. I couldn't even get tickets for myself. I ended up with 2 tickets for the trampolining. Don't laugh, it was very good. Plenty many tickets. Question number 2. Is it really like the 2012 programme on the TV? Now, you probably don't get this here, but you had one here, didn't you, when they had the Olympics in Sydney? You had the programme The Games. And we had one in London that was just a spoof of the whole thing. Oh my God, was that true to life? It was really embarrassing. They had one episode where they did this whole skit about the wind turbine that was eventually cancelled, and I'll talk to you about the wind turbine that was cancelled later. But they're having this really, I mean, you know, these people are basically just a bunch of idiots, you know, trying to put the Olympics on. And they're having this conversation about the wind turbine and realise that they're going to build this wind turbine and it's really not very windy. And this character, which is the really sort of right-on PR lady, is saying, well, can't you put a motor in it to make it look like it's going round during the games when it's not windy? That conversation actually took place. It really did, believe me. It's frightening. The BBC had great insight into what was going on there. It was very embarrassing. Question number 3. What's it like working for Mayor Boris Johnson? Is he really as balmy as he appears on the television? Yes! I don't know if you kind of get Boris over here, but he's known for being a little bit eccentric. And this is one of his more interesting gaffes. He was out in Seoul in Korea for some reason. I don't know quite what he was doing there, but he was being interviewed on the TV and being asked about the Olympics and saying, oh, the Olympics are really, really big. It's huge. It's like eating a hippopotamus. And he didn't realise that hippopotamuses are much revered creatures in Korea, apparently, and they're an endangered species. So talking about eating one really didn't go down very well at all. My first encounter with Boris, because Ken Livingstone was mayor when the commission was first set up. Boris Johnson was elected mayor in 2008. So I rock up to the Olympic board to give my annual presentation on our sort of independent view of sustainability issues. And Boris has got a mind like a butterfly, you know, he was kind of, you know, staring into space and looking around and wasn't really taking a blind bit of notice of what I was saying. And then suddenly he sort of zoomed in on the subject, and he's extremely intelligent, although he's mad, he's very, very intelligent. So he looked at me and said, are we going to get electric cars for the Olympics? So that was a bit difficult because this was in 2008, and I know you didn't notice it here, but we had a bit of a recession in Europe around about that time, and things were a bit difficult. And the car industry, the way that major events like this work commercially, is that the deal is basically how much will you pay us for the privilege of supplying us 4,000 cars for free for the period of the Olympics in return for some brand recognition like this. At the time, the car industry was, you know, in a great deal of uncertainty, and it was hard to find sponsors. So anyway, I waffled to waffle, hoping that he'd, you know, go back to wherever he was thinking about before, but he didn't. He said, no, I asked you a question. Are we going to get electric cars? So, well, I can't actually say right now, you know, there isn't a car sponsorship deal on the table. We've set some carbon emission limits for cars, you know, we've set some very high environmental standards. But until such a time as we can attract some sponsors, I can't tell you. So I said, well, I want a briefing. You know, I want you to come and tell me all about electric cars. Okay, fine. So the meeting goes on. And I kid you not, this is what the guy's like. Having then told me that he wants me to brief him about cars, he sort of stared into space and went, electric cars, yeah, plug in, tune in, drop out, man. Honestly, he did, it's true. Anyway, so eventually the car deal is being negotiated, and I rock up to give him my appraisal of the car arrangements. There were 3 bidders at the end of the day. I won't mention the 3rd one because they weren't very good and they didn't really appear in the public domain. But we ended up with a 2-way competition between Nissan and BMW. And Nissan came along and said, well, you know, this is the Green Games, we're going to offer 2,000 of our Nissan Leaf models. I always struggle a bit with the plural there. I don't know what you think. What do you call more than one Nissan Leaf? Is it leaves or is it leafs?
A tree.
It's mentioned.
A tree.
A tree. It could be a tree. Yeah, absolutely. It could be a forest. Forest. Leaves. Anyway, whatever it was, they offered 2,000 of them. And Nissan came along and gave a presentation about what they were proposing to do, bearing in mind that this was a car that wasn't in production at the time. They hadn't actually brought it into manufacture. And we asked some fairly basic questions like, where are we going to plug them in then? You know, and they said, well, that's not our problem. We're just supplying the cars. You know, you need to work out where to plug them in. So the fleet guys, you know, with a 24/7 operation like the Olympics, they worked out that of a 4,000 car fleet, probably the highest number of electric cars they could deal with would be about 400. So looking at the carbon emissions then of the 2 fleets on an assumption of 400 electric cars from Nissan, BMW offer 200 electric cars, but mostly from their other cars from their efficient dynamics range. The BMW cars, the ordinary cars, are actually much more efficient than Nissan's. So the greenest deal was BMW. So, and also it was by far the most commercially compelling deal. So it was a win-win for everybody. So I went along and briefed him about this, and he was listening and paying attention, or at least I thought he was. Because about 2 weeks later, I see him being interviewed on the TV by one of these well-armed journalists, you know, that's asking him all sorts of difficult questions. He said, well, what about the Olympics, Mr. Johnson? What about the car fleet? You know, Nissan offered 2,000 electric cars and you rejected them. You know, so you chose the deal that wasn't the greenest. I thought, great, brilliant. This is my opportunity. This is my claim to fame. Tell them, I've told you this. Tell them what I just told you. Now, what he did was he said, well, yeah, but BMW offered us more dosh, didn't they? Oh, great, thanks a bunch, Boris. That was my claim to fame. Disappeared up in smoke in no time at all. Right, let me tell you briefly about the Commission and how we're constituted and how we operate. This is our one-sentence purpose statement. There are some important words in here that I've highlighted in red. Independent. We're an official body, but we're an independent body. As Mark said in the introduction, we're there to tell it as it is. We have our own website, our own reports, our own direct reporting relationship with the political leadership, our own relationships with the NGOs, the media, etc. Independent, very, very important. Assurance and commentary. Michael, we fought over that word. I think you were there at the time, weren't you, Gary? Yeah, oh dear. And commentary. You can't do traditional assurance on an Olympic Games because traditional assurance looks backwards. It looks and says, well, okay, what did you set out to do? Did you do it? Can you show me the evidence that you've done it? Yes or no? And if you haven't, what will you do next time to put it right? There is no next time for an Olympics. You only get one shot at this. So our assurance work needed to be turned on its head, so we were always looking forwards. What are your plans? What are your priorities? What are your objectives? Do you have the resources? Do you have the systems? Do you have the processes? Have you considered all aspects of sustainability in an appropriate way? Can we provide the evidence to demonstrate that you haven't? So it's always looking forward, and that's an important aspect and a new aspect of something that we're doing, because the Commission is quite unique. It's never been done before. There's never been a body like it anywhere in the world, as far as we're aware. There may never be a body like it again, I don't know. The final important word then is to support a sustainable legacy. As I said in the introduction, I've always seen the Olympic Games as a regeneration project interrupted by sport. Those of you that are familiar with London may not be all that familiar with the part of London that the Olympic Park is developed in. It's the three boroughs surrounding the park are among the poorest in Europe. This is poor East London. It's not rich central London. It's not the West End. London has failed miserably to regenerate the East End for the last 200 years. And this is our one shot at acting as a catalyst for it. So we've always had our eyes very, very closely on legacy. This is how it's structured. So my role as chair reports to the chair of something called the Olympic Board. That chairmanship is rotated between the Mayor of London and the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport. The other two members of the board are Lord Sebastian Coe, the chairman of LOCOG, London Organising Committee of the Olympic Games, and Lord Colin Moynihan, the chairman of the British Olympic Association. I've got a great team of people, but just a small team, 3 people. We did recruit 1 additional person during the games, so we went up to 4. Environmental sustainability experts that can really turn up, do the research, ask the difficult questions, produce the reports, etc. I'm advised by a great group of commissioners. They're all experts in various different fields of sustainability, and they're volunteers. They give up to 20 days a year of their time to support the Commission, and they've been absolutely brilliant. Couldn't have done it without them. We have relationships with a huge range of stakeholders. This is just a representative sample of the types of organisations that we need to engage with to help shape our assurance work, but in a way that we continue to be a professional assurance body and not a campaigning body. Very important. And then we provide our assurance over all of the organisations that are delivering the games, and there are many, many of them. But primarily the ODA, the Olympic Delivery Authority, they built the facilities. LOCOG, London Organising Committee of the Olympic Games, they're responsible for staging the games. And then various government organisations, the Greater London Authority, Transport for London, Central Government, Department of Culture, Media and Sport. Some local organisations, local authorities that were delivering venues and the games outside London. So that's how it all works. What I'd like to do now is just pause for breath for a minute. I've given you a kind of quick overview of the Commission and how it operates. What I want to do now is to move on and start to talk to you a little bit about some aspects of sustainability related to the Games. But do we have any questions, comments on the Commission before we move on?
Just a question in terms of enforceability, I guess,
Yeah.
or purpose.
Yeah.
There's nothing there with compliance or enforcement.
Yeah, it's an interesting question I'm asked quite often. It's an interesting one. No, we didn't have or don't have any legal powers, you know, so there's nothing that I can do to kind of punish people for not doing what they said they would do, other than the very nature of the independence of the Commission. So I can go and kick the Mayor's door down or the Secretary of State's door down to say, you have a problem here, and I would advise you to fix it. I did that twice in the 7 years of the Commission. But I think the important thing is that the delivery bodies know that I can do that. So I've got a lot of negotiating power in terms of saying, look, this is something that we think we should be doing. We've investigated it, we don't think you are. So let's talk about it. And the vast majority of issues, and there were hundreds of them, we managed to, you know, resolve behind closed doors with the senior executives of the various delivery bodies. The other thing that we have, which gives us a great deal of power, is an independent relationship with the media. And there have been occasions when I've kind of outed things to the media in a way that the delivery bodies really wouldn't want me to. An example of that would be the Olympic torch for the torch relay. There was a promise at a very early stage to deliver a low-carbon Olympic torch and a low-carbon Olympic cauldron, and I'll talk about the cauldron later. But the talks turned out to be a failure. You know, LOCOG and their sponsors EDF called me up, I think about 2 days before they were due to put an announcement out in the media. They'd been telling us everything was going well, they're developing an alternative fuel for the torch, everything's going to be fine, and then they said, oh, the design of the torch is going to be announced in 2 days' time. So we guess we better tell you that, you know, it's not going to be low carbon. So we had a bit of a full and frank discussion about that. And I put out a press release on the same day that the design of the torch was announced to say, well, they've screwed up, it's not, you know, it's supposed to be low carbon and it's not. EDF put out a press release which really shot themselves in the foot to say, we've been working hard on this since 2009 and we just ran out of time, you know, we can't do it in time. So I went on the TV to say, well, yeah, but you promised to do it in 2007. So what you're saying is you sat in your butts for 2 years and did nothing, and now you're coming and telling me that you've run out of time. That made all the broadsheets, so the whole, it really rained on the parade of their nice torch design announcement. All of the serious papers took the story about it not being low carbon. There was an article here, we had an article from The Australian that was talking about the non-low carbon torch. So I think the delivery bodies kind of get the message that we have some skin in the game here, and it would be very unwise of them to ignore us. So I feel very comfortable with that. I don't think that I needed any statutory powers or you know, ways to kind of formally bring these bodies to book, because we had enough clout with our reporting line, our relationship with the media, our independence, our relationship with the NGOs as well, if we needed to use that. That was more than adequate for us to make sure that these people really did what they were supposed to do. Gary?
It was a very pressure cooker atmosphere, wasn't it? I mean, that's to put it mildly.
Gary and I worked together in London on this.
Particularly with, you know, having to work with the mayor and with the delivery bodies themselves, and also with the government. That sort of balance between effective assurance, which really required you to be in some ways embedded and to establish these relationships of trust all the way through the hierarchies of these organisations, and maintaining independence. How did you really sort of tackle that one?
Yeah, it was a difficult one. Yeah, Gary at the beginning was working for the Mayor's office. He's only 22 really. The pressure has told him. That was a judgment call the whole time, because we had to have very productive relationships with the NGOs. So with Friends of the Earth, with Greenpeace, WWF, some of the more local bodies that had legitimate interest in the sustainability of the Games. But at the same time, we needed to have a pragmatic relationship with the delivery bodies. And so we needed to be kind of strong enough for the NGOs to believe that we were credible. Otherwise, we'd just be rubbished by the NGOs and be told we're just another layer of bureaucracy and an organisation that's there to make excuses. But equally, we needed to maintain the relationship with the delivery bodies. I didn't have a secret formula for doing that. It was really just exercising good judgment and getting good advice at all points during the process. So relying on advice from my commissioners and sometimes people from outside the commission in terms of how best to deal with certain situations. And I think we kind of learned our way into it. And I'll talk a little bit later about the wind turbine, but a decision was made to cancel the wind turbine on the Olympic Park for very good reasons. And I was engaging consistently in dialogue with the NGOs in confidence, which was a bit of a risk because they could at any time have decided to crap on me and go to the media with it, but they didn't. And actually to kind of foster that understanding as a genuine independent body to say, yes, this is the right decision to cancel the wind turbine. And when the announcement was made, then I went on the TV to say, yeah, this is the right decision. All of the NGOs, the Greenpeaces, the Friends of the Earth and all of that were rang up by the media because they always want to stir up a bit of controversy. And they all told them to talk to me. And that was, I was very proud of that because I think what that meant was we'd ended up with the right decision not to build a wind turbine. We'd ended up getting the right level of understanding from the NGOs to do that. So, as I say, on other occasions, the talks, no, you screwed it up, and I'm going to tell the world that you screwed it up. When you've made a good decision that might not necessarily appear to be the greenest decision, like the wind turbine, or even like the deal with the cars with BMW, then we need to make sure that we've got a credible voice to say, yes, we've looked at this in a logical and pragmatic way, and we believe it to be the right decision. Should we move on? Okay, let's move on. Right, let me talk about a few aspects of sustainability now around the Olympics. I mean, there's lots and lots to talk up, so I can give you a few examples, and then happy to take questions around anything else that you might be interested in. Towards sustainable construction. This is about constructing things sustainably and not about constructing sustainable things. There's a difference. I'm going to cover both. The ODA were fantastic. They set a wonderful range of best practice objectives. They looked at best practice all around the world. They consulted with a whole range of organisations, including mine. They put together a really comprehensive range of objectives, and they achieved all but one of them, which was the carbon objective, and I'll talk about that in a moment. This is a sample of the objectives that they set and achieved. You'll notice there are objectives related to local employment, related to elements of the workforce previously unemployed. So social and economic, diversity and inclusion objectives in there, as well as environmental objectives, and that they were very, very well achieved. Sustainable infrastructure. So this is looking at what's been left behind. And was that infrastructure as sustainable as it could have and should have been? I think that's a bit of a mixed bag. We had some great infrastructure, some great energy infrastructure, so combined cooling, heat and power for the Olympic Park, for the Olympic Village, for the shopping mall next to the Olympic Village, all connected together with the district heating and cooling system. We've got black water recycling, so we're using water that's been recycled from sewage to irrigate the park and to flush the toilets and even as the feedstock for the district heating system, so that's all very clever stuff. We've got a fantastic new green park. It's the biggest new green urban space that's been created in Europe for the last 200 years. So all of that's really good, but I don't think we got it quite right. And I think, this energy centre here, one of the less glamorous buildings on the Olympic Park, is fuelled by natural gas, with a bit of extra effort, and with looking seriously at anaerobic digestion in East London for processing food waste, and then looking at transporting the gas back to the CHP, we could have had a renewable energy option. It was one of the promises to act as a catalyst for new waste infrastructure in East London, and it just didn't happen. You know, that was something that, that just failed to happen. And as I said, there was to be a wind turbine on the park, and it was cancelled. It was cancelled for very good reasons. What that meant was the ODA had an objective of 50% reduction in carbon compared to a business as usual case based on the building regulations, and they ended up achieving 47 at the end of the day. The remaining small percentage was effectively offset, I suppose, through donating some money to a mayoral scheme called Renew, which is all about insulation for people in fuel poverty, you know, improving energy efficiency of homes and schools within the local community around the Olympic Park. I supported that decision. I think it was the right thing to do because the alternative renewable technologies on a relatively small scale were just simply not economic, and they really weren't going to work. So I think we ended up with the best solution there. But it would be my view, at the very, very early stage, this was one of the first contracts that was let for the energy centre. Had there been a bit more imagination, a bit more risk-taking to an extent, and progressive thinking, I think we could have done a little bit better. So, good, but could have been better. Right, let me talk about the velodrome. Well, I'm going to talk about buildings in the Olympic Park generally, but I'm going to use the velodrome as an example because I love it, it's brilliant. This building has a story. The original design for the building was 40 million over budget. The designers, you know, rocked up to the executives of the ODA to say, here you go, lovely velodrome, you know, all we need is an extra 40 million and it's yours. As Mark mentioned in his introduction, the chief executive of the ODA is a gentleman called David Higgins. You may know from over here. He used to be chief executive of Lendlease. He's a very uncompromising Australian. And he used some very colourful language to express his opinion about this. So then they said, well, you know, if you want it in budget, then you'll have to, you know, you'll have to relax the sustainability requirements then. And there was a fairly similar response. You know, the sustainability standard was set at a very early stage of the project. You knew what it was when you bid for the job. You knew what the budget was. Now bugger off and deliver what you said you were going to deliver in the first place. And they did. Because that uncompromising attitude drove innovation. So we ended up with a velodrome with a cable net supported roof and not a traditional steel roof. That made the whole structure much lighter and cheaper, so lower embodied energy. You needed less steel to support the roof, you needed less concrete in the ground to support the steel, you didn't have to dig some big deep holes to put the concrete in. Fantastic. We've ended up with a velodrome that has half the materials of the equivalent velodrome in Beijing. The sustainability objectives for each and every building were, again, just no compromise. This is what you have to deliver. 15% better energy efficiency than the building regulations, 25% of the materials recycled content, 90% waste diverted from landfill, a whole bunch of others. This building has 30% better energy efficiency than the building regs, thanks to the use of natural light and natural cooling, which is fantastic. 37% recycled materials as against the target of 25. It can be done. The other important design feature of this building is all of the design was related to legacy. You know, what was going to happen was for about a week and a half, a bunch of Olympians were going to be on their bikes in the lycra suits with the, you know, with the you know, those fancy helmets with all of the aerodynamics and all that, flying around the track, and all the world's TV cameras were going to be there. There was going to be loads of lighting cameras and all of that sort of stuff. The building was designed for all of that to come in as a temporary facility. So if you need extra air conditioning to take away the heat that the TV lights are creating, then you bring in the air conditioning. You don't design it into the building, because for 99% of the time you don't need it. Even when there's competition going on, it's very rare that it's televised to the world in the way that the Olympics was. So some really innovative thinking and pragmatic thinking gives us a great sustainable design and a great building like this. And many of the other buildings on the park are the same, except the aquatic centre. But I'm well known for being rude about the aquatic centre, so I'll shut up about that for now. Okay, so that's a little bit about the buildings and the infrastructure. Now let me talk about the event itself. My commission published its report last week, actually, last Thursday, our post-games report, which I think has been circulated to everybody who came here. And quite interestingly, we actually published it last Thursday, and I did all the sort of media stuff, and then I got on a plane Friday evening and came here. So it's the first opportunity I've had to talk about the report in public has actually been on the other side of the world, which feels a bit strange. Okay, so what happened during the games? Well, the thing that struck me about the difference in cultures between the organisations, between the ODA and LOCOG, was quite extreme. The ODA were a very professional public body. You know, they're there to build stuff, and they recruited some of the best people in the world at doing that. So very process-led, very much what I would understand as a lapsed engineer of an ordered process for doing things. LOCOG is a private organisation. Their responsibility, they're government-owned, they're a private company. All of the £2 billion for staging the games comes from private revenues of various sorts. There's no public money involved. So they behave very differently. You know, they're commercially much more astute. The event management industry all happens at the last minute. You know, a whole bunch of people rock up and stuff happens. You know, the amount of planning that goes on is relatively minimal in a lot of cases. The event management industry is inherently very wasteful. You know, it's all about put the event on. If you need a few extra generators, so what? And then it's all about get out as quickly as possible afterwards. So you tip everything you don't need in the skip, and then you move on to the next event. And that's the sort of culture of the industry. You also have many, many partners coming in that you can't control. So, you know, the IOC turn up, the various national governing bodies for the Olympics turn up, the Olympic Broadcasting Service turn up. So whereas the ODA had a big checkbook at the top and could control everything that happened through their supply chain, that's really not the case when you come to staging the games. So it's a completely different culture, totally different atmosphere, different management experience, different bunch of people to deal with. So, how did they do? Well, let me talk about integration and use a couple of examples, because it is necessary to have an integrated strategy to deliver some of these end games, and this is the energy one that we start with. So I've already talked about, you know, you start off by designing and building some highly efficient buildings, which in the main was done. You have some energy infrastructure in place, which again was done. I don't think it was done perfectly, but it was done. So you've got all the ingredients to start to deliver an energy efficient event. But then you still need to do it on the day. You need energy management on the day. This is an EDF website that was showing real-time information about the energy consumption of all of the venues during the games. But that wasn't done well. Why wasn't it done well? Well, LOCOG simply didn't have an energy conservation plan. I told them they should have about a year and a half ago, and they ignored that advice, and eventually they appointed a consultant around about January 2012 to work up an energy efficiency plan. That piece of work wasn't finished until March. You know, we're getting very close now to the games in July. And then they recruited a couple of guys that didn't come on board until May to do the monitoring and targeting work and to actually drive efficiencies into the system. The two guys did a tremendous job. You know, they used to be up at 6 o'clock every morning looking at yesterday's energy data, contacting the venue managers, looking at what can be done. But they didn't have time to educate the venue managers, to build relationships with the venue managers, and get people to understand what they might be able to do differently to deliver on greater energy efficiency. And I think that was a major failure in financial terms as well as environmental terms, because had they just employed those two guys for 6 months longer, that would have cost, I don't know, you know, $100,000, whatever it might be, I don't know, not very much in the scheme of things. They had an electricity bill of £6 million. They could have easily knocked £1 million out of that bill by just simply appointing the consultants that they appointed anyway 6 months earlier, and appointed the resources that were supposed to implement the plan that the consultants recommended 6 months earlier. So you got, you know, 6 months worth of salary for two guys, and you save yourself £1 million. Why didn't they do that? So that was just poor planning, you know, and an opportunity lost in my opinion. Okay, let me talk about a better integrated strategy now. This is about waste. The typical waste performance of the event management industry, as I say, they kind of turn up, you know, you look at the detritus after a rock festival or major sporting event, you know, there's litter everywhere, isn't there? 15% waste diverted from landfill is a good performance for the event management industry. So Locog ignored that and said we will be the world's first zero to landfill summer games. And more than that, we will reuse, recycle or compost 70% of that waste. So you couldn't get away with just burning it all. And that required some really good fundamental thinking. The team worked for 4 or 5 years very diligently on some of these things. So we ended up with this really nice funky 3-bin solution. So segregating waste at source. There were hundreds of these bins around the park, very prominent. People were looking at them, talking about them. We got Coca-Cola to sponsor it, so they paid for them, which was great. And then looking at the packaging, everything that's coming into the site. That was really, really important. So you end up with, particularly the food packaging for the catering, and I'll talk about food in a moment. Everything was required to be compostable, because the only way you can really deal with sort of contaminated food packaging waste is to have compostable packaging. And that has given a huge boost to the compostable food packaging industry in the UK. You know, this level of demand all of a sudden has gone, wow, you know, we really need this stuff. And then you've got the clever colour coding. So you've got the orangey colour there for the compostable packaging, which I'm told is not in accordance with the international protocol for colour coding these things, but I don't really care because it worked. So you've got orangey colour logo there, you've got an orangey colour bin with an orangey colour logo. So if you've got one of these, where are you going to put it? You know, you're going to put it in this bin. Then you get even cleverer because you've got a sort of an orange colour bin liner. So the operatives that empty the bins, who aren't necessarily always known for their intellectual prowess, have got an orange colour bin liner, they put it into the big orange bin, it goes on the big orange truck that takes the stuff away to where the orange stuff goes, and it goes away and it gets composted, which is brilliant. So that was really clever, very clever thinking, you know, a lot of planning went into that, a lot of changing of an industry, you know, moving towards compostable packaging. And what that tended to do, because you end up with this whole sort of zero waste ethos within the business, it starts people innovating and thinking in different ways. So you end up with something like this. Would anybody like to hazard a guess what this is? Now this is Sydney's opportunity, because Melbourne didn't know and Brisbane didn't know, so come on Sydney, tell me what you think this is.
Is it a linear composting building?
Very nearly. It's the BBC TV studio. But you know, it's close. If you've heard some of the stories in the media about the BBC lately, it might be even closer than you think. Yeah, this is the live broadcast studio of the BBC, right in the middle of the Olympic Park. It's made out of shipping containers. And when they finish with it, they just take it apart and send the shipping containers back to the shipping company. And interestingly, around the corner from this facility, there's another one of these, only bigger. And that belonged to the Olympic Broadcast Service, which provided the international broadcasting. Because the BBC had one, they had to have one as well, you know, so they built theirs out of shipping containers. And then you kind of take it to its, you know, to its ultimate expression of creative waste management when you go to the Royal Artillery Barracks where they had a shooting competition, and they decided to have a dog poo wormery to actually compost the dog poo on site without needing to send it everywhere. And this was just the team locally just kind of dreamed that up and put a big sign on it. So there you go, dog poo wormery, fantastic. So let me talk about food. I was lucky enough to go to the games in Beijing in 2008 as part of the Observer program there. And I can tell you from first-hand experience, the catering in Beijing was absolutely bloody abominable. The food was crap. What happened was all of the catering outlets were, other than McDonald's, because they're the global sponsor for catering for the Olympics, for the IOC, they were all run by the Chinese government, and they had these little tents that had exactly the same 10 things on the menu. And it was all like dehydrated, reconstituted, processed. I mean, it was horrible. It really was. You know, to the extent that you go, oh, thank God there's a McDonald's. You know, I wouldn't normally say that in my life, I have to say. So London was really, really determined to do something better and to do something different. To celebrate London's diversity through food. There are over 400 languages spoken in London. It's one of the most cosmopolitan cities in the world. So let's have food from all over the world. Let's get local small caterers involved in doing all of this. And it was a fantastic success, but also The food vision that LOCOG set out set the very highest possible standards of sustainability for the food. So we've got Red Tractor certified meat from sustainable ethical sources. We've got Rainforest Alliance or Fair Trade for tea, coffee and all of that sort of stuff. We've got organic milk, we've got free range eggs, we've got MSC certified fish. That whole specification was a complete revelation to the catering industry in the UK. The supermarkets are doing some of this stuff, but the big caterers are not. So they were really forced to behave very differently, because not only, you know, if you look at this packet of sandwiches here, you know, you need the compostable packaging because that's one of the requirements, but the stuff inside it needs to come from certified sustainable sources. And the whole thing was a really big learning curve for the catering industry. Again, this was started very early, you know, 3 or 4 years ago. These discussions were taking place. The industry was involved. Interestingly, McDonald's also bought into the food vision. Although they're the exclusive branded restaurant on the games, they only actually serve 10% of the meals. It's a myth that when you go to an Olympics you can only get food from McDonald's. But they bought into the food vision as well, so they had all the certified MSC, the organic, the free range, the whole thing. And apparently there was a bit of a row with McDonald's parent company in the States who were really not very happy about this. Because the UK then was kind of setting a precedent that the rest of the company doesn't necessarily achieve, certainly not in the United States. The other thing I'd like to talk about is this picture here, which is about drinking water. There was airport-style security at all the venues, which means you can't bring liquids in above 10 millilitres or whatever it is, the same as an airport. So I was absolutely insistent that, you know, free drinking water should be available on the site. It was. That was a first for an Olympics. It hasn't been done before, but there wasn't enough of it. There were huge queues starting to form for the drinking water, and it wasn't very well signposted. Well, no, actually, it wasn't very well signposted. It wasn't signposted at all. The signing for everything else was fantastic, but if you wanted to know where the drinking water was, you had to either search for it or go and ask one of the volunteers. And, you know, I would say privately, because they would never admit to this, that Coca-Cola had a bit of a hand in that. They weren't very happy because they were the exclusive provider of soft drinks on the games. So if you're getting free water from here, you're not necessarily buying bottles of stuff from Coke. And, you know, as I say, they'll never admit it in public, but I think they have a say in the lack of signposting for the drinking water. So sponsors, you know, I'll be talking about them in a minute. They've done some great stuff. Sometimes, you know, the commercial relationships don't help. So food, fantastic success, great success. Drinking water, yeah, there could have been more of it, but it was a first. It was a breakthrough and a big improvement on Olympics before. A couple of other issues just to talk to you about as far as the games are concerned. Logistics. I think that was a great success. UPS were the logistics partner. They came up with all sorts of cunning ways of bringing things in during the games. They established a logistics centre at Tilbury Docks on the mouth of the Thames there. They experimented with bringing a lot of stuff in by barge. They had a fleet of electric vans, which proved to be really successful. Because what they were able to do was to bring a lot of stuff in at night, because the vans don't make any noise. At night there's less traffic, so it was a lot easier to bring things in. Could be done more quickly, more economically. So they were charging the vans up during the day and using them at night. So that was a great success. So some really good lessons learned there about logistics. This wasn't quite so clever. Here's a massive, big temporary catering refrigeration unit full of HFCs. Despite the fact that LOCOG specified that there wouldn't be any coolants with global warming potential above 150, the hire industry just completely ignored it. LOCOG put their specification out. The fridge hire industry is just still full of HFCs. There is no non-HFC refrigeration available in the UK, and unfortunately LOCOG failed to influence that industry. Green space, I've talked about a little bit before. You may have seen the pictures of the Olympic Park on the TV. Compared to previous Olympic parks, this is one that really did kind of blend with nature. You had the fantastic river valley going through the park, and you know, these pictures don't really do it justice in terms of the way that the natural planting was done, the trees, and this is a park designed to, you know, still be looking fantastic in 200 years' time. So it's not all kind of concrete and steel, it's very much a natural environment. The surprise success story of the games was transport. Those of you that have been to London will know that getting around that city can be a little bit frustrating at times. And everybody thought the transport infrastructure would fall over and it wouldn't work and there'd be queues and there'd be gridlock on the road and the whole thing would be terrible. And it wasn't. It works. Transport for London, you know, big up to you. They did a fantastic job. And we ended up with some new services. This big beastie here is what was called during the games the Olympic Javelin. It's actually the high-speed rail link from London St Pancras through the Channel Tunnel to Paris and Brussels. But during the games it was used as a kind of a mass transport from St Pancras to Stratford, and it could get from St Pancras to Stratford in 7 minutes. Those of you that are familiar with London will know that that's like the equivalent of the bloody moon landing or something, you know, it's just like, that could never happen. And we've got some great new infrastructure as well. This is a cable car, and this cable car runs from the Greenwich Peninsula, the Millennium Dome, or the whatever it was called during the North Greenwich Arena, because we weren't allowed to call it O2 because of branding rights, during the games, across to the Albert Dock where the Excel Centre is. Now, in London, because the river is particularly wide at that point, that would be kind of a 40-minute ride on the tube to get from one to the other, whereas this just gets you straight across in about 5 minutes. So it's a really good addition to London's public transport offer, but it's also a great tourist attraction. You can go up there, you can see all the way down to the Thames Barrier, you can see across Canary Wharf in the city. So it's a really good addition to the London experience. And it's down in East London, and it's starting to bring East London together as a destination. Over here we have a mobility service. There was at least one of these, in fact there were many of these at all the venues. It's the first Olympic Games to have a comprehensive mobility service for disabled people. So if you're disabled, you can turn up here, you can get advice on how to get around with various disabilities that you might have. They got loads of wheelchairs, they had a load of these little funky electric scooter things that you could just go and ask for and get and use during the games and drop off again. So a fantastic service for disabled people, a really big improvement, again certainly on Beijing, which wasn't all that good in terms of facilities for the disabled. Deaf and blind people didn't do quite so well. One of my commissioners is blind, and he had difficulty getting audio commentary at some of the games. People didn't know where to get it. He eventually got one of these audio commentary machines and it fell to bits in his hand. It wasn't particularly well made. And sometimes the audio commentaries just didn't happen. So not a perfect situation. There was a thing as well with the cash machines, and they have a plug where you can plug your earphones into the cash machine. And Visa, in their infinite wisdom, didn't install the software to get the audio version for the cash machine. And again, that was a wonderful excuse. I had a bit of a go at them in the media as well. Oh, there wasn't time to do it. Yeah. Visa are a top sponsor, they're an IOC sponsor, they sponsor multiple games. It's like, you had 7 years! You know, how long does it take to install a bit of software in a bloody cash machine? So that wasn't very good. So not perfect, but certainly overall a really good story. Okay, let me talk about this. Who saw this on the TV? The opening ceremony? Yeah, that's fantastic, wasn't it? This was an interesting story about the Olympic cauldron because if you can remember as far back as the beginning of the presentation this morning, I was talking about the torch and the failure to deliver a low carbon torch. So I nagged low carbon because I said, look, you promised two things. You screwed up on one, you said you'd deliver a low carbon torch and you didn't, and you say that you're going to deliver a low carbon cauldron. Can you reassure me that this is going to happen? And they kept going, yeah, it's going to happen. I said, yeah, but you told me that about the torch. You know, everything was going to be good. And then 2 days before the bloody torch, you know, it didn't happen. And I don't want to be there, you know, the day after the opening ceremony trying to explain why you didn't get it right. So eventually, they rang up, a very senior person who rang up, and said, Bill Morris is going to call you. Bill Morris is the director of ceremonies. And he's going to tell you about the cauldron to shut you up, but you must keep it a secret because it's part of the opening ceremony. Yeah, okay. So anyway, Bill called me up and described what the cauldron was going to be like. I didn't realise at the time quite how dark a secret it was, because the day after the opening ceremony, the papers were all full of the fact that there were only 6 people in the world that knew what this thing was going to look like, and there was actually 7. It was me, but Bill didn't tell them what he told me. But this is, and you would have seen during the opening ceremony, These sort of burner things are about this size, a sort of a petal-shaped thing. Each of the teams brought one in during the opening ceremony, so there are 208 of these, one for each competing nation. What they did after the games was they took it to bits, and they sent each one back. It's actually engraved with the competing nation's name, and they sent it back as a souvenir to the nation. But the important thing about this is if you look at this wonderful structure, which just looks fantastic, it weighs 16 tons. The Olympic cauldron in Beijing weighed 300 tons. You know, so the whole, you know, they completely turned the design and the thinking inside out. In the interest of low carbon and in the interest of making something look really spectacular. The gas consumption of this beastie, although when it was all together it looked like a fantastic big flame, is 15% of the gas consumption in Beijing. So it really is a low carbon and inspirational product. And somebody asked me, well, what happens to it after the games? I said, well, it's quite simple. They just unscrew these things, they send them back to the nations, and then all you're left with is a bunch of pipes. You just take it to bits and send it away for recycling, and that was it. It's not something, you know, it's not a permanent thing, because you only need it during the games. So I was delighted with that. I think Locom did a fantastic job. And it really was, you know, a surprising and spectacular thing that people weren't expecting, because, you know, during the opening ceremony, people said, well, where's the cauldron? You know, where's the flame going to be? Because it was all under the ground, and it kind of rose up out of the ground at the end. Let me talk a little bit about sponsors now, and some of the more controversial issues during the games. This picture here, this is one that I took, so excuse the quality of it, it's not great. This is the Olympic Stadium. The Olympic Stadium is surrounded by basically strips of white plastic that form the stadium wrap, and it comes away again after the games. And in front of the Olympic Stadium, you've got one of these sort of bouncy rubbery surfaces that's made out of recycled plastic. Both of these products were made by Dow Chemical Corporation of the United States, and this one in particular proved to be very controversial. Dow Chemical in 2010 became a top sponsor of the IOC, an international sponsor. They tendered to supply the wrap, they won the tender, and then they used their sponsorship rights to basically supply the wrap for free as part of their contribution in kind to the London Olympics. This caused howls of very serious protest, particularly from Amnesty International, from an organisation called the Bhopal Medical Appeal. These are organisations that believe that Dow Chemical are responsible for the disaster in 1984 in Bhopal, where 20,000 people lost their lives. Dow Chemical would say it's nothing to do with us. The plant in 1984 was owned and operated by Union Carbide. Union Carbide settled claims, I think it was $750 million or something like that, by 1991. They sold their Indian business and exited from India in 1998, and then Dow Chemical bought Union Carbide in 2001. That doesn't cut any ice at all with the NGOs who believe that Dow Chemical purchased the liabilities as well as the assets of Union Carbide, and so it's all their fault that the victims are not being treated well. That got really hairy. You know, there was a lot of stuff in the press. One of my commissioners resigned over it very spectacularly on live TV, which was slightly embarrassing. I received threats. I got death threats. I got abusive phone calls, emails. I had to take advice from some of the security people responsible for the games. It all got very, very heavy. I think my position in all of this was, look, I'm not responsible for policing the world's corporate responsibility. You know, it's taken an army of lawyers 37 years to not come to a conclusion about who's responsible for compensating the victims of Bhopal. So I sure as hell can't sort it out. What I can tell you is that this wrap was the most sustainable wrap of 6 tenders. This is a fantastic sustainable product. It's a non-PVC product, it's got a quarter of the embodied carbon emissions, it's half the weight of its competitors, there's a great plan for reusing it. They're going to cut it up and turn it into tents for the Red Cross after the games. So it's a really good story, and that's, you know, that's the end of my responsibility here. I can't make a judgment about whether Dow Chemical are good people or bad people. Not everybody agreed with that, and I got a lot of stick for it. However, I think there is something here. There is a relationship between the Olympic values which are supposed to be all about harmony and comradeship and peace and you know, fostering better relations through sports, and some of the companies that commercially sponsor these events and their behaviour. It's not possible to sort of create a framework and make a judgment and say, you know, you're a good company, you're in, you're a bad company, you're out. That clearly doesn't work. But having some form of constructive engagement around ethics, I think should happen. I think it's the responsibility of the IOC, it's not the responsibility of the host cities. I think it's something that should be done. So we can start to tackle some of these issues, because it was very emotive. There was lots of money involved. You know, Dow Chemical turned up with a plane full of sharp-suited American lawyers, and I received all sorts of representations after that, not just about Dow. I got BP protesters from Canada that were protesting about their treatment of the tar sands in Canada, some native Canadians there. I got people up from the Gulf of Mexico also complaining about BP and their lack of responsibility for the clean-up after the Deepwater Horizons disaster. I had people from Mongolia and the United States talking about Rio Tinto and some of the terrible things that they do in their mining operations. They were supplying the metal for the metals. You know, it really was open season for everybody that had a grudge against a corporation. So, I think something needs to be done about this. I don't think we should brush it under the carpet. Right, this second picture is again a pathetic amateurish photography attempt at trying to capture the huge scale of the London 2012 megastore. This is only about half of it, it's absolutely enormous. And the variety of useless tap that you get in there with a London 2012 logo on it, oh my God, you know, does anybody need all this stuff? But of course the games organisers need the revenue, you know, there's serious revenue coming out of this. LOCOG did a load of stuff to try and deal with the issues around corporate ethics and labour standards in the supply chain of this sort of stuff. They had every merchandise licensee, every factory had to sign up to a global database called SEDEX. Every factory had to have an audit. That audit had to be approved by LOCOG. I saw evidence that LOCOG had reviewed the audits. They had asked for clarification and corrective action. They had stopped manufacture of some products until the audits were satisfactory. And then what happened? Along comes an organisation called the Playfair Alliance. And that's a group of NGOs and trade unionists who target the sportswear industry and labour standards in the sportswear industry. So they always turn up wherever there's a World Cup or an Olympics or a big sporting event. I was up on the Gold Coast the other day talking to the people about the Commonwealth Games that are coming in 2018, and I said, these people are going to be after you, you know, they've never heard of them. They will, don't worry. These people put undercover workers into 2 factories in China, and they found breaches of all 10 principles of the Ethical Trade Initiative base code in both factories. 100% success rate for them. And they put a report out in the papers. Thankfully, I had a good relationship with these people. They gave me a copy of the report about 3 weeks before they published it. I was able to broker some discussion between LOCOG and these guys, and we tried to come up with some sort of constructive corrective action around it. But the fact remains that the merchandise industry is rife with sweatshops in various different parts of the world, and this is another problem that will not go away. And again, I think an individual games organiser has limited commercial clout and capability to deal with it, but the organisations commissioning them do have. So once again, organisations like the IOC, like FIFA, like UEFA, I think have a responsibility here, maybe to create longer-term relationships with the manufacturers of this sort of stuff, in such a way that the workers' rights can be upheld in a much more productive way. So here's 2 areas hugely controversial during the Games. Lots of money involved, lots of emotion involved. After the Games, next year in January, I'm going to sit some of these protagonists around the table and start to try and work up some constructive solutions before I pack the Commission in March, because I think these are issues that, you know, we can't just keep ignoring them. We need to grasp the nettle and deal with them in some way.
Shaun,
yeah.
A question on that. What about the whole consumption side of sustainability? You know, that's a massive consumption exercise.
It is. it would be very nice, wouldn't it, to be high-minded and say you don't have any of these shops, you don't have any of this crap, you know, because nobody really needs it. It's not going to happen. You have to be realistic. People do want to buy. I mean, this on one peak day in the park. And I don't know exactly how big this shop is, but it's like bloody huge. They had to shut it because it was so full. There was such an enormous queue outside. It was causing health and safety problems. So the demand is there. And I think it's very difficult to say, well, you know, okay, we're not going to have any of this stuff. I agree with you in principle. It's conspicuous consumption for absolutely no reason whatsoever. You know, what do you need all this stuff? But the reality is, it's a huge source of revenue. People like it. People expect it when they come to the games. They want to go to the shop and take some souvenirs away. I was astonished how popular that shop was. It was just incredible. It was just full. I hated it. You know, I wouldn't go anywhere near the bloody place. But people love it. Okay. Let's talk about communities. Let's talk a little bit more about legacy. I'm kind of a glass half full person when it comes to thinking about legacy. This is the Olympic Village, which will be home for 2,700 people during, after the Games. It's 50% of which will be social and affordable housing. It will be a fantastic place to live. There's lots of green park, green space. It's very high quality accommodation. It's very sustainable accommodation. It's the first major development that was built to code for sustainable homes, level 4 in the UK. So it's 70% better energy efficiency, there's non-potable water, there's all the good stuff there, which is fantastic. But you don't really notice. I had the great honour of spending the night in the athletes' accommodation a couple of weeks before the Games. They had a commissioning event and they organised a big booze up in the athletes' dining hall, and we all went to sleep in one of the athletes' accommodation apartments there, which was fantastic. And it just felt like a nice apartment. You know, you didn't know it was sustainable. And I think that's great because, you know, it starts to say we don't all have to live in caves, you know, and go back to mud huts or something to have a sustainable way of life. You can live in a fantastic place like this and actually be sustainable because the infrastructure is so sustainable. You've got access then to the Olympic Park, which is a great green park. You've got fantastic sporting facilities there in Legacy. This park will be developed out over the next 40 years. There'll be 40,000 new homes developed in this area over the period. It's the best connected place for public transport, you know, pretty much anywhere, I think, in London. But we still have housing like this just up the road. So one Olympic Park is not and one Olympic Village is not going to regenerate an entire part of London. So there's much more to be done. One thing that did encourage me during the Games, it was quite an entertaining story. The West End, the traders in the West End of London started to complain during the Games that they were quiet and they weren't taking very much money. You know, the restaurants were empty and the pubs were empty and, you know, people weren't going out in the West End. And I thought that was great. I thought, oh, sod you know, get a life, guys. The East End was rocking because people were turning up, they were going to their Olympic event, they were having a fantastic experience on the park, the catering was great, and they could stay, they could go and sit out on the live site and watch the action on the big screen. Or they could go out of the park into Stratford. And those of you that maybe if you've ever been to Stratford like 4 or 5 years ago, you would know if you went there and you came back with all of your teeth and your wallet and you're watching your mobile phone, you consider yourself quite lucky. It was, you know, a very, very poor place, very high crime rate. People were staying. You know, there was a new Westfield Centre being built alongside of the Olympic Park. There was all sorts of restaurants and bars and stuff like that. And it was packed and people were having a great time. And I didn't think ever in my lifetime I would be able to say, you know, people are not going to the West End because they've got all they need in Stratford. You know, it's just an astonishing thing to say. So that fills me with optimism because it's starting to create this part of London as a destination, as a place that people want to come and to visit, which hopefully then starts to feel a sense of purpose and a sense of place, somewhere that people want to come and live and work and stay. Because what happens at the moment is East London is pretty much a traditional stopping off place for immigrants. I mean, the city has always relied on immigration for its economic development. And they turn up and they live somewhere like this and all they want to do is go and live somewhere else. And then, you know, they get a better job and they get a bit more money and they go and move to a better part of London, and then you get the next wave of people coming in. And to actually break that circle, I think is going to be really, really difficult. But I think there are optimistic signs. We do have a legacy company. The legacy company was started about 4 years ago, which again is a first. If you look at Sydney, they didn't start a legacy company, I think, until 2 years after the Games. Beijing, 1 year after the Games. Athens, not at all. And if you look at the Olympic facilities in Athens and how they're used now or not used, you would not be surprised to hear that. So I think there is optimism for legacy, but there's much, much more to be done. Right, we're getting near the end now. Making a difference. This is all about lessons learned. This is all about the legacy of knowledge. We've achieved some great things through the Olympics. We've had some things that haven't been achieved, maybe, as well as they should be. And how can we actually share that knowledge to make that happen in other parts of the country and the other parts of the world? Mark mentioned earlier the Supply Chain School. This is an initiative that I have with my other hat on as a Director of Action and Sustainability. We've created an online learning environment in the UK around sustainability for the supply chains of major construction contractors. It was only launched in June. It's proved to be hugely popular. We've got 2,000 members signed up already. There's self-assessment in there. There's a kind of prioritised learning environment where you get the sort of learning that you need, depending on what you do in the supply chain and what level of competence you have. There's lots of e-learning, there's face-to-face events, there's links to over 450 really well-selected resources. And that's led by a number of brands that you might recognise here, some that you won't, but these 6 of the major construction contractors in the UK. The Construction Industry Training Board are funding it, Construction Skills. My company, Action Sustainability, is delivering it. And the really good news is that we're working with Net Balance and with AGIC and Green Building Council and a number of other organisations here in Australia to try and pull together an Australian version of this.